Hello all! Rick here with a video topic I've been working on for a while, and that is to look into Starfleet's most important Starship designs. I will be using information found beyond simply the shows, akin to the classes I have looked at individually in that ongoing series of videos. I chose to tackle this over the most vital ships to the Federation overall, as naturally that would ultimately become a list of hero ships, as they are in the thick of events almost all the time. But by simply looking at the classes themselves, we eliminate things like the Enterprise, which for the most part was always selected from established, albeit new, vessels because they were already a known factor. That being said, at 10th place we're going to have an Enterprise. There's no getting around it, the NX-01 was the first Warp 5 engine of Starfleet and humans overall. As the first exploration ship running not only the Warp 5 Cochrane Archer core, but then testing out phase cannons, translation software, sensor suites and more, the NX class set the premise for mankind's voyages into space. It was the furthest travelling human vessel and a statement to its allies, chiefly the Vulcans, of what the humans were about. With this one, it's pretty impossible not to talk on the Enterprise itself. It's the first and only long-range exploration craft, and it was pretty much writing the rulebook as it went. Many of its alterations, repairs and additions were then added as standard to the following Columbia, then the 03 and 04. You can say that if not this ship, then it would have been another, because ultimately Starfleet had to start somewhere. I'm going to throw in a strange one at 9th. The Challenger class. In old lore, it was said that the nacelles of a vessel needed to maintain line of sight, at least at some points, to facilitate the warp field. This has since been toyed around with to create more interesting designs, and also not something that every species in the galaxy stuck to anyway. But Apocrypha, being what it is, didn't hand-wave this away as a retconned lore, but devised a reason to explain it away. The implementation of warp field refractors. The Challenger had a nacelle above and one below the vessel, where there was no way they could maintain that golden rule. The reason for this was a series of refractors that provided that needed connection through the ship, sort of like power lines, manipulating the field. In universe, because of this breakthrough that the Challenger class provided, new designs were suddenly opened up and things could get far more interesting, contributing to things like the Defiant and allowing for more of the nacelles to be interrupted and still maintain the needed effects. On the topic of warp, my 8th entry is the warp coasting ability incorporated from the Constellation class. Prior to this, the Starfleet had been experimenting with 4 nacelle ships for a while, but they'd never really cracked it. The Constellation was different from prior vessels as it introduced the ability to smoothly transfer power and the warp field from pair to pair, while allowing a cycling of cooldown periods between the sets. This seamlessly allowed the vessel to fly for much longer at higher factors, and suddenly those further frontiers of the unexplored space were just a little bit closer. This is one of many designs that we're going to see emerge from that seldom seen lost era of Star Trek, and not the last to focus on propulsion advancements. The Walker class sits here at 7th. This came at a time after the NX-01 refit and the formation of the Federation. Starfleet was busy unifying disparate technologies from a multitude of other lines of vessel, and the Walker was the first true successful exploration line. The hodgepodge of various tech somehow came together to create something that was greater than the sum of its parts. And throughout the vessels that continued on into the late 23rd century, we could see the throwbacks to that old era of innovative design, a time where Starfleet really was experimenting and trying to find what worked. The Discovery era vessels are not everyone's cup of tea, but the small oddities, like the horizontal transporter, the underslung bridge, these all harken from before Starfleet began to settle on a more unified approach to ship systems and construction. While soon outclassed, the Walker class exceeded predictions and gave the fledgling UFP a working idea of what its exploratory arm could become. Now, I'm going to have to include a prototype that we witnessed at 6th place with the Defiant, the first true battleship and a testbed for lots of tech that became standard down the line. Designed in part by Benjamin Sisko and team, the vessel was created to combat the Borg, with the addition of pulse phase cannons, ablative armour and an integrated cloaking device. The class, however, proved to have some major design flaws, with its miniaturised warp core being incredibly overpowered for its size and liable to fly itself apart if mishandled. Extensive field testing in the crucible of the Dominion War refined the designs, and while future ships would not quite bear the same armaments and destructive capability of the Defiant class, it brought Starfleet's offensive prowess to the same levels as their exploratory abilities. Additionally, advancements in the condensation of tech to make it all fit also added to the list of achievements this class can claim. Now, I'm going to put something here that might deserve to be higher up the list, but listen. The Constitution class sits at 5th place on this list because it was quite simply unmatched for a long time. By the next generation, every 5 years there was a newer and faster vessel, but the Connie retained its crown as the poster ship and most coveted posting in Starfleet for a reason. More recent additions to the lore attribute this to the versatility of its systems, allowing for a major overhaul of both its superstructure and internals so that it could stay at the cutting edge of development. Already a formidable class when it entered service, this adaptability was something that Starfleet seldom employed again, even on their multi-role vessels. Truly it was one of a kind. The only reason it's not higher up on the list is simply because it was more often the beneficiary of other research and classes' developments being ported over. Certainly, it had some systems tested on it at times, but the Constitution was not there to innovate design, but to be representative of Starfleet as a whole, an amalgam of ideas. It would be remiss of me not to include the Excelsior class at 4th place. While the Great Experiment of 2285 saw the new class outfitted with a theoretical transwarp drive system that may have failed to manifest, just because that one aspect of it was a dud, it did not mean the class was a failure, far from it. In fact, there is evidence to suggest that the transwarp project was not a total loss, as the warp scale was recalibrated soon thereafter, and a massive leap in warp technology ushered in. Coupled with a lot of advanced systems that could be upgraded and maintained throughout the next 90 years, and you've got one of Starfleet's most recognisable classes. Much like the California, this ended up being a workhorse for Starfleet and supported the Federation for a very long time, even carrying its weight in the Dominion War. Before the top 3, I have a couple of honourable mentions. Firstly, the Sovereign class, because people would be mad if I did not mention it at all. But while it was a formidable and effective ship for its time, it was basically a culmination of other classes' achievements, more so than the Constitution. The same can be said for the Galaxy class, as it took what had been working up until that point and combined it into a very powerful ship with a multi-purpose role. The Protostar, with its incredible Drive 2, would make this list if it wasn't for the fact it looks like the Proto Drive still remains on the back burner for a while longer, and the initial test ship was hampered by its displacement in time and subsequent loss. And finally, I'm going to call out the Odyssey class, my favourite ship, but we simply don't know enough about it in canon. The Ambassador class is not my favourite vessel. I have always found it a bit too basic looking, lacking the presence of the Galaxy and the elegance of the Constitution, but there is no denying that it was a pivotal vessel for Starfleet. In terms of its look, it was the stepping stone from the Lost Era, where the warp nacelle design radically changed once more so that they were no longer about half the length of the ship. But internally too, they saw a myriad of changes. Isolinear chips were already in existence by this time, but the Ambassador class was the first to fully implement them as its primary hardware, phasing out the older duotronic model. This does not sound like a major overhaul, but it led to upgrades across pretty much every system. and the computing power exploded in efficiency. On top of this, the Ambassador class was the first ship to incorporate phaser strips from the start, replacing turrets and cannons. Now, this position on the list was a toss-up between several ships, but I eventually settled on giving second place to the Dauntless class. That is to say, Starfleet's actual one, not the false Dauntless that inspired it. With Voyager's return, many technologies and scans had been accumulated from the Delta Quadrant, and among them were the designs for quantum slipstream drive. Admiral Janeway was placed to oversee several projects built off a myriad of these technologies, especially propulsion testbed ships including the Protostar and Dauntless. It's not clear in canon yet if the successful implementation of the QSD was passed on to other vessels, but in most external media this is the case. Books have the USS Aventine, games have the QSD on almost every Starfleet ship by the 25th century, and we know they were common after another 700 years for sure. But it all started with the Dauntless class test ship, commanded by Janeway herself. However, the class itself does not look like it entered into production, but the following Lamar class, Voyager A, and then the Pathfinder Voyager B, had such drives too. So it looks like the success of the Dauntless proved the tech reliable enough for larger implementation. Which takes me to the natural next and final on this list. The Intrepid. The bioneural circuitry, variable warp geometry, the best sensor systems, and incredibly efficient warp drive. The Intrepid class was a genuine breakthrough in multiple avenues of Starship design. Even its profile was slimmed down to better serve the warp drive, and combined with its smarter computer systems that could almost organically think, the Intrepid class could maintain high warp factors for days. On top of this, those same smart systems allowed amazing levels of sifting through information, so its astrometrics facilities were the best in the fleet, and I'm not even talking about Voyager specifically. Their systems also allowed for the growth and development of the EMH, which then opened up a whole new avenue of research with sentient holograms, albeit an unforeseen advancement. So many of Starfleet's 25th century developments can trace their roots to this class, so for that reason, it's my top pick. So there we go, my list of the top 10 most influential designs to come out of Starfleet. You could make an argument for pretty much any vessel, to be honest. The Prometheus class for its multi-vector assault mode, for example, but that was not seen again. The Oberth for a list of what not to do, or the Miranda for its longevity too. Even the California class could be argued for its sheer workhorse role in keeping the wheels of the Federation turning in the background. So what would you add, and if you disagree, what would you drop from this list? Until the next video, I've been Rick, and thanks again for watching. Goodbye.